Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have filmmaker Ken Burns back with us today. We'll chat with Ken in just a moment. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So Ken Burns has been making documentary films for almost 50 years. Since the Academy Award-nominated Brooklyn Bridge in 1981, he has gone on to direct and produce some of the most acclaimed historical documentaries ever made, including the Civil War, baseball, jazz, the war, the national parks, America's Best Idea, Prohibition, the Roosevelts, an intimate history, the Vietnam War, country music, the U.S. and the Holocaust, the American Buffalo, and Leonardo da Vinci. Future film projects include Emancipation to Exodus and LBJ and the Great Society, among others. Ken's films have been honored with dozens of major awards, including 17 Emmy Awards, 2 Grammy Awards, and 2 Oscar nominations. In September of 2008, at the News and Documentary Emmy Awards, Ken was honored by the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences with a Lifetime Achievement Award. In November of 2022, Ken was inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame, and we're thrilled to have him with us today to discuss his latest masterpiece, The American Revolution. Ken, welcome back into the back room.
Great to be with you, Andy.
So congrats on the series and the very deserving acclaim it and you have been getting. In my opinion, it should be required viewing in schools because there is just so much to be learned from it. I also have to say, for history nerds, it's like the equivalent of the Beatles' epic 8-hour Get Back series.
Thank you. We it was a total surprise, and the we is important. This is co-directed by Sarah Botstein and David Schmidt, and written by a longtime collaborator, Jeffrey Ward, and a lot of talented people, editors and researchers and producers and map makers and things like that. So it was just a revelation for us, and took nearly a decade to wrestle it all to the ground.
Yeah, well, just like when I watched Get Back, and a lot of people were like, 8 hours, it's too much. I was like, not enough.
Not enough.
Not enough. I could take more. So the historian Alan Taylor says in episode 2, quote, "The greatest misconception about the American Revolution is that it was something that unified Americans. It leaves out the reality that it was a civil war among Americans." I would venture to guess that most Americans have little understanding or appreciation for that reality.
No, it's true. And you could even say that our Civil War, which is the subject of a film that I devoted a lot of time to making, was not a civil war, but a sectional war, one part of the country against the other. A civil war involves huge amounts of civilian deaths, of which outside of Missouri and eastern bleeding Kansas in our Civil War, they're not. But our revolution is a civil war, and it's also a world war, a global war over the prize of North America. That's been probably the 4th or 5th global war over the prize of that. I think we think that democracy was the intent of it. It was not. It was an unintended outcome of it. There are lots of other things, and understand the variety of the players involved is super important. We tend to think, and understandably, there are no photographs, there's no newsreels. We know what the paintings are. They're very heroic, that it's a bunch of guys in Philadelphia thinking up great thoughts, and there were a bunch of guys in Philadelphia, and they were as great of thoughts that have ever been thought. But it's not the whole story, and it's not how did this, argument between Englishmen break into a revolution that was about bigger rights, and who was involved. I mean, this is about, 13 states that had almost nothing in common. The difference between somebody from Massachusetts and Georgia was, a gulf that no one was going to be able to put together or close, and George Washington was able to. This involves women. This involves children. This involves free and enslaved Black people. This involves Native Americans. It involves Irish and Scottish and Welsh and English soldiers and their generals and their ministers and their king, and German soldiers and officers and French kings and ministers. I mean, it is so complicated. By the time the war is over, it's being fought in the subcontinent of India, in what is now the Philippines and Gibraltar. Spain has joined France, and the Netherlands has too. This is a big global conflagration that originally intended to be a kind of Republican government that only white men of property would have to do it. But in order to win that revolution, a lot of people had to contribute, and then some of them had to be rewarded. And democracy is one of the unintended consequences of that revolution.
Hmm. And the revolution is one of the most mythologized periods in American history. What myths in particular do you feel were most important for you to sort of interrogate and or dismantle?
We don't have to do that. If you do that, then you've accepted a kind of binary. You get stuck in that kind of action. I can tell you that nowhere do people say don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. Betsy Ross is not mentioned. Nobody, Paul Revere does not gallop the redcoats are coming, the redcoats. He says the regulars are coming out, not as sexy. So I think what you do is you just say, I have a set of assumptions about it. Some of them aren't true, but you don't have to point neon signs at it. I think what you have to do is just go deep, do a deep dive and figure out what actually took place and what were the reasons for why that took place. And it's always inevitably incredibly complex and incredibly interesting. And it isn't just a nerdy thing. I mean, anybody who is concerned about the United States, anybody who loves their country, and we're calling balls and strikes. We have no political agenda to address in this film. We are just telling a complex story that is just, I mean, I won't work on a more important film than this because of the complexity of the ideas, the importance of the American Revolution in world history, and the importance that the United States has held in the world since its founding. It should be something we'd be ultra curious about, but I think in some ways we've smothered those people with a kind of gallant, bloodless myth, thinking that if we deal with the nitty gritty of it, if we lift up the tapestry and uncover some of the dirt, that it'll diminish those big ideas. It's the exact opposite. Those big ideas are made even more inspiring by what actually transpired. And just to go to one point that you made, we enjoyed a grant from a foundation, the Kern Family Foundation in Wisconsin, for the production, but they gave an even larger grant of nearly $7 million to PBS, who have mounted the largest educational outreach in the history of the network. And so they're already able to reach every schoolroom, every classroom in the country. And so we're really excited by materials that we've developed with the educators for third, for fifth, for eighth, for 11th, for continuing education and obviously higher ed, college stuff. It's very robust, and I think it'll be possible for this film to live. Today is a school day in the United States, as our Civil War series, which is 35 years old and still being shown hundreds of times today. Not the whole thing, but maybe 40 minutes about Gettysburg, or 40 minutes about black troops, or 40 minutes about Lincoln, whatever it might be. It's in continual rotation, and that's exciting. And I'd like to see the Revolution, our film in the American Revolution, have that same sort of deep reach.
Mm-hmm. And your work often highlights tensions between America's ideals and its realities. How did the revolution embody that contradiction?
Well, it's always true. It's true in any event. The thing that is just start at the beginning, after I love you, which is the most important sentence in the English language, I would argue that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the second most important sentence. And it's written by a man who owned other human beings. So right there you have a contradiction. But the way our binary world works is that you throw him out or you ignore that inconvenient truth. And that's not the way storytelling goes. Storytelling is always about understanding the complexities of the stuff. Same is true. We have this incredibly diverse, amazing cast of characters. We introduce you to many of the people you've heard of, but also many, many people that I'd never heard of, scores of them. But at the end of the day, there's only one person who's responsible for our country, and that's George Washington. Now, he's deeply flawed. He's rash on the battlefield, risking his life and therefore the entire cause. And he makes a couple of stunning battlefield mistakes, tactical mistakes, that cost him, not just one, two, maybe three battles. And yet there's nobody that could have held the country together. He knew how to make that Georgian and that person from Massachusetts realize that they were Americans. He knew how to inspire people in the dead of night. He knew how to pick subordinate talent without a worry that they might overshadow them, even though some of them were better generals than him. He knew how to defer to Congress, and more importantly, twice. First his military commission, and then his presidency. He gave up power twice. I mean, it's just set in motion, this example. So it's easy to sort of go at the binary of ideals and failed ideals, but everybody has that massive contradictions. Our notion of heroism has nothing to do with perfection. If you expect that, there are no heroes. But the Greeks, we inherited this notion from the Greeks, who are interested in the inner negotiations, inner war sometimes between a person's strength and their weaknesses. So Achilles has his heel and his hubris to go along with his great strength, and it is that negotiation between these seeming opposites that define heroism, that define the human experience. And you can't be married, you can't have children, you can't be in strong friendships, you can't be in work unless you understand that the only thing that's binary is our just incredibly superficial politics and media.
Yeah, and for me, one of the things I was particularly struck by was the brutality and abject cruelty during this war on all sides.
All sides. All sides. It is phenomenal. And I think that as I suggested, I think we've encrusted the revolution with the barnacles of sentimentality and nostalgia. And so nobody gets killed. It's just big ideas. And that's one way to do it. But to understand, it's probably a proportional sacrifice to the Civil War. That's 750,000 people murdered. We don't know what the death rate is. There's just no way of knowing. It coincides also with a continent-wide pandemic of smallpox and typhus and other things that kill way more people than that. And some of them are soldiers who are mixing together for the first time. We don't have any records of Native peoples and their populations keeping kind of accurate census of things. So it's incredibly bloody, and sometimes it's guerrilla warfare. The thing that it reminded me closest to, I made a film on the history of the Vietnam War. It reminded me of South Vietnam, and thinking that the British and their Hessian allies were like the South Vietnamese and their American allies trying to deal with the VC, trying to deal with the Viet Cong. And they pacify after Washington loses New York, the Battle of Long Island, because of a mistake on his part. He's retreating across New Jersey, and people are flooding into the city and into New Jersey to sign declarations of dependence. But as every occupying army knows, they create, problems. They steal they raid the barn, they steal the furniture, they rape women, they, murder sons, they do bad things. And the whole population of New Jersey then switches. And in one season, more British and Hessian soldiers were killed out looking for forage by guerrillas, animated as much by revenge as by any cause. Then they were killed in battles like Trenton and Princeton in that war. It's devastating, and then it's even much worse in South Carolina. So these are all revelations to me over the last 10 years, and trying to communicate that to people is not just saying it's all bad. It's really good. The outcome was the United States of America. And for all the things that we screwed up over the years, it's still like an amazing invention. And that's what we're celebrating in the film. But we're not going to get there without telling you a complexity. And one of the things, I've been on the road, as you know, for about 10 months, just talking, and I've been saying the same thing to everybody. The same thing that I'm saying to you, I said to Joe Rogan, I said to Theo Vaughn, I said to groups all across the country, adults, to children, to inner city school kids in Charleston and Detroit and Chicago, suburban thing, to the New York Times editorial board, exactly the same thing. Because as Mark Twain says, tell the truth and then you don't have to remember anything.
Right.
I don't have to do this. And so we have a really great story. And one of the things I like to say to people is that, one of the darlings of the conservatives was supposed to be this series called Yellowstone, starring Kevin Costner, which I've seen. It's wonderful. I love it too. I don't know why it's only supposed to be for conservatives. Anyway, what is that about? Well, that's about a father figure, right? The father of this story, who is this very wise man, and he has 3 kids, and he's also a murderer. When people screw up or piss him off, They end up dead and in a ravine, never to be found again. He's got a very strong-willed daughter who's exactly the same way as him. He's got one son who's conflicted, married to a Native American woman, and also trying to figure out what his relationship is to his family and his father. The other son is Benedict Arnold. There's a ranch hand whom the daughter is in love with, and he oversees a group of ranch hands that are black and white, gay and straight, old and young, from all parts of the country. And around them are Native people still trying to figure out how they can retain some sense of sovereignty about the land that has been taken from them, and superseding them are greedy speculators and developers.
So that's where you got the idea for this from.
I know we began it before Yellowstone started, and it ended and it ended before our series was broadcast. But no, I'm just trying to say that all of us are drawn to the complexity of stories, and it's only the insistence of orthodoxy that says it should be only one way, right? And you just go, wait a second, how is that possible? I fully enjoyed Yellowstone, every act of it and every character in it, and it's all complex. So's William Shakespeare, if you want to take an even highbrow thing. But somehow our history has to be, either one thing, or the other, and it can't just be both. Wynton Marsalis said that to me in jazz. He said, sometimes a thing and the opposite of a thing are true at the same time. We know that. We know that. But somehow our politics and our sort of the superficial aspects of our media can't tolerate anything but an on-off switch.
Yeah, and speaking of truths, and you touched on this a little while ago, and I think it's really important to note the amount of time that the series devotes to the role of enslaved people, free people, Native Americans, women, groups whose experiences are often sidelined in traditional revolutionary narratives, especially those taught in schools. I mean, I don't ever remember being taught about.
You could argue that the first casualty of the American Revolution is in the Boston Massacre, when 5 men were killed by British soldiers occupying Boston in the spring of 1770. And the first one killed was Crispus Attucks, a mixed race Native American and black man there. Blacks are fighting in Lexington and Concord. Blacks are fighting in Bunker Hill and Distinguished. In fact, we follow the fortunes of a young 14-year-old boy who's now beginning to regret that he signed up. John Greenwood, when the Battle of Bunker Hill is happening, but then he sees a black man who's been injured in the back of the neck, and he's freaking out. But then he sees that the guy asks that a patch be put on it, and he's going back to the battle. And he said it made him strong and feel more like a soldier. Native people are part of it. The 13 colonies are superimposed on their land. There are many Native peoples who are either coexisting or have been assimilated, and on our western border are not like one them. It's like many distinct nations, as distinct as France is from Prussia. Shawnee are from the Cherokee, and they've got different languages and different beliefs and different relationships to the British or the French or the colonists. And so it's very confusing. In any city that you went into, say, just pick Philadelphia, you're going to see Native people from many different tribes just walking through there. Women are central to the story of the Revolution. The resistance doesn't happen without them foregoing British goods, and they're often fighting. They're certainly accompanying the armies. You don't think of these armies as having women there and children, and they're doing the wash. They're tending to the dead. They're and the wounded. It's an amazingly dynamic and fluid situation. And the image of the sturdy militiamen, they're often the first ones to leave, to plant the crops, to harvest the crops. And what ends up being the Continental Army are a bunch of teenagers, jobless people, second and third sons without the chance of inheritance, recent immigrants, nobody's owning property. And what had begun as a war to defend the rights of property owners is fought largely by people who own little or no property at all. That's one of the dynamics of the revolution. And so I'm sorry, you have to tell the complexity of the story, why certain things happened. And if that's hard for you, then you can go back and stick your head back in the sand.
Is there a personal story or a particular figure from the revolution that's moved you the most?
Well, There are dozens, and George Washington is one. I mean, I
Hmm.
understood a little bit more than just let's just put it this way. David
He
McCullough,
liked his slaves.
David McCullough said there's no foreseeable future in the past, right? So nobody knows how this is going to turn out. Not George Washington, not John Greenwood, right? Not Betsy Ambler, who's 10 years old and lives in Yorktown, but is a refugee for most of the war, traveling all around Virginia. We don't think of Americans as refugees in that way. Um, there's a guy, Joseph Plum Martin from Connecticut, who signs up a few days after the Declaration of Independence. He's blooded. He sees his first action in the Battle of Long Island, the biggest battle. And he's there climbing over Redoubt number 10 at Yorktown, 5 years later, a little bit over 5 years later. It's an amazing story. He's like the quintessential grunt that you see in World War II movies or Vietnam movies, or they're in every war, and they like accept what the orders are given. They don't like their officers. They don't like the food. They're fighting for something, and there's something incredibly directly honest about about Joseph Plum Martin and what he leaves us. But that, people say, who's the best writer? Is it Franklin? Is it Jefferson? Who it is? Adams? Is it Washington, who writes really, really beautifully? It might be Abigail Adams, right? Thank God they were split up. She was split up from her husband for so many years because we have one of the greatest correspondents in history. All these people are interesting. They're Native Americans that have dynamics. They're agonizing over who to go with. They think, well, you'll go with the British because they don't want our land. But of course, if the British win, the continent's going to be taken over by them too, And we, by the way, did not call it the Eastern Seaboard Congress, and we didn't put George Washington in charge of the Eastern Seaboard Army. We called it the Continental Army. We knew where we were going. We knew what we wanted, and we were planning to take it by hook or by crook. And so I'm sorry, we call balls and strikes. And in our world, we live in a world in which it's just a highlight reel. And in that highlight reel, all Babe Ruth does is hit home runs. But Babe Ruth strikes out more times than he hits home runs. He sometimes hits into game-ending double play. And oh, by the way, he only comes up to bat once every 9 times. So sometime, as our most recent World Series proved to us, that a middle infielder, a second baseman, might be of central importance at a critical time. And so all we've done is just called balls and strikes. It does not take away from all the home runs that George Washington hit.
The series has aired during a particularly tumultuous time in our country. We are living in a polarized political era. What do you hope modern viewers take away from a story about rebellion, about nation building, and competing visions for America?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, first of all, we have to, as Lincoln said, disenthrall ourselves, which means stop being a slave to something, which is an interesting choice of words. We're a slave to our own sort of self-importance, our own narcissism, our own sense that our time is the most important time, a sense that this could not be any worse than it is right now. In fact, the revolution is a much worse time. We're way more divided back then over the same sorts of issues with the same sort of people. Human nature doesn't change. There's the same combination of virtue and venality back then as you can find now. And so stop making it seem like this is always the worst, that the sky is falling, that too much navel gazing or a kind of these forces are that are swirling now are the forces that have always been around. They've been around every era and every event that I've ever taken, whether it's a war or not. They are present. And so arming yourself with an understanding of history is just the best thing you can do. It kind of tempers your own narcissism. It gives you a huge amount of humility. It provides a modicum of optimism. And optimism is not a naive or pejorative condition. It's actually a good way to relate to things. And it gives you a longer view. Like I remember during the '08 meltdown, which I know you remember, I had a friend who was in the financial services industry. He said, man, this is a depression. I've never seen it worse. I said, in the depression in many American cities, the animals in the zoo were shot and the meat distributed to the poor. When that happens, I'll agree with you. Now, that never happened, and it doesn't say that it's not going to happen, but let's just use our knowledge of where we have been as a species, and in our case, as Americans, to temper the exaggeration and hyperbole that attends to any particular moment. And so embedded in your question is the idea of revolution. That means we're going to be at fighting with one another. When in fact, the revolution was a way to try to stop, in some ways, these inevitable divisions, to design a system that works out these things. And it's only the subversion of aspects of that that threaten the polity and threaten the sort of kind of cohesiveness of the American experience.
Yeah, I think one of the greatest gifts that the series offers is that it is a reminder to us all that despite how divided we may believe America is today, the Republic has experienced way worse.
So then the Civil War, that's really divided. The
Yeah.
Vietnam period, there were hundreds of bombings from the late 60s through the middle of the 70s. Hundreds of bombings. Hundreds of bombings. Like, we just caught a guy who was trying to set 2 bombs that never went off, right? Back in January 6th of 2021. Hundreds of bombings. So let's just kind of take that Chicken Little routine and down a couple of notches and then kind of look at it. You can lament at all the things that are lamentable, but you still have the ability to get up and to voice your opinion, and more importantly, to vote, right? And then, then you can complain. A lot of people don't vote. A lot of people listening to you don't vote or figure out a way not to do it and say, well, it doesn't really count. You're crazy if you think that's the case. And you've essentially given authoritarians an extra head start. And that's unacceptable. There's a wonderful moment. A German soldier, we follow many Germans, but we follow a German soldier, particularly named Johann Ewald. He's throughout the film, he's openly disdainful of these rebels, as of course the British called us all the time, and they picked it up too, and of their ideas. But he's part of the surrendering army at Yorktown. Sorry, spoiler alert. And he comes out of there and he says, who would have thought 100 years ago that out of this multitude of rabble could arise a people who could defy kings?
Yeah.
That is us. That is us. So it's built into our blood system to defy kings. And so you can spend a lot of time with your social media, in your feeds, doing this and lamenting. And it's another thing to get up and go out and just say, not gonna stand for this, right? People say the founders would be rolling in their graves. You know what? They probably would be if they could come here. They wouldn't be surprised that somebody was seeking more authoritarian power. They tried to reverse engineer everything about that. What they'd be so disappointed in was that Article 1 is not the executive. Article 2 is the executive. Article 1 is the legislative, that the legislative branch had ceded so much of its power to someone who was also concurrently trying to get more monarchical, more authoritarian power. That would be the thing they would just say, what? We designed this for you, the legislators, the voice of the people, and you're what? That would be the thing that they'd be really, really disappointed in, I think.
If you could correct one widespread misunderstanding Americans have about the revolution, what would that be?
I don't know. There's so many. I'm not sure I'm in the correcting business. I'm sort of in the trying to tell a good story business, which means that you're always dealing with a lot of free electrons and loose ends and inconvenient facts and stuff that doesn't fit. I just think that it's the rawness, the realness of it, that when you tell a good story that happens to be rooted in the past, and people feel like they're present, which is what I'm hearing. Like, I feel like I finally know who George Washington is, or I finally understand what it was like to be in a battle, whether hot or cold, in Quebec with Benedict Arnold, our great star general, until he's not, or in Monmouth Courthouse in New Jersey, where it may be close to 100 degrees and 20 Brits are dying every day of heat stroke. I mean, to say that there are loose ends is to describe human beings. So it's not an attempt to sort of correct something. It's an attempt to sort of try to put your arm around the complexity of the situation and bring it back as near you can in something that people will recognize as just that. Like, you cannot fit all of your convenient theories, whether you're left, right, or center, your round theories into the square peg of the revolution, or vice versa. And that's great. I made a film on baseball, and then I made an update of the film on baseball called The 10th Inning, and I interviewed again Tom Boswell, who was the great, now retired sports writer for the Washington Post. And out of the blue, when we're talking about steroids and Barry Bonds and how to handle that, he said, John Keats, the poet, said of William Shakespeare, another poet and playwright, that Shakespeare had what Keats called was negative capability, the ability to hold things in tension, good and bad, and not make a decision. Like the moralist in us wants something right away, good, bad, white hat, black hat, whatever it might be. But to hold that in tension is exactly what our faith, what our art, what our humanity demands. And then you don't see the other as an other. You see there's only just us. I mean, like the US, it's just us. There's no them. So when you see somebody decrying an immigrant in a nation of immigrants, or saying that we've got to go back to some, with regard to the founding and the revolution, some heritage, blood and soil thing, well, then you're talking about Native people. Because it's their land, and it's their soil, and it's their blood, and it's their heritage. And we've been here for what, 9, 10 generations, and they've been here for 600. Mm-hmm. So there's just more, the deeper you dive, you're not excluding anybody. You're not revising history. You're pulling the lens back and going, holy Toledo, it's not this guy on the dollar bill. He didn't know he was going to be on the dollar bill. He didn't know he'd be on the quarter. He didn't know he'd have a big pointy thing in the national capital named for him, that across the country there'd be another state named for him. In every other state, there's some hamlet or village or county that's named for him. He had no idea that was going to happen. He was just a planter who happened to also be able to adapt and change. He arrives in Cambridge, Mass, and he says, we're not hiring any more we're not bringing on any more black soldiers, and that changes. He sees how they perform. He entertains the petitions of his officers, and he goes, oh. So as the historian Jane Kamansky, he had the hard no of Virginia planter, and then he had his mind changed. And that's all you ask of people, right? And he freed his slaves at his death, right? Thomas Jefferson didn't do that. And there were people who were freeing their slaves before their deaths. And that's to their everlasting credit. So this is a hugely complex story. And if you wanted to put it in black and white, you've lost. Already you've lost. You've lost the nuance, the complexity. You're eating cardboard and not, a crepe.
And thanks for coming on and talking about it. Congrats
it's always
again.
Great to be with you. With you, my friend.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece, and people I should really watch this. It's available to stream
for free,
on PBS for free.
Yep.
And I hope they do that.
Thanks so very much. Great to be with you.
All righty, take care. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Maddie Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langell. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.